Hey folks, before we look at the 1DX Mark II, please jump over to my website and check out my Business of Photography series. If you want to start making money from your photography or just start paying for your new gear, check this out. Everything you need to get started and work out how to find customers, price your products, and make a successful business. And if you're not at that level yet, you can check out my online learning course, Kickstart Your Photography, a 6-month course of weekly lessons and assignments, and a great supportive community environment. Now let's check out that new Canon. Hey folks, and welcome. Today we're here to talk about the new Canon 1DX Mark II that has just been announced. So I was at CES in Las Vegas at the start of the year. I went over to see the Nikon announcements, and Nikon announced their new D5, and it looks absolutely phenomenal. There was nothing from Canon at the time. The 1DX is overdue, keeping in mind that Nikon tend to do D4, D4S, D5, whereas Canon just do, Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3 without the interim S-type step. Look, I have owned the Nikon D4 and the Canon 1DX, and on paper, the Canon outperformed the Nikon in every regard. It was higher res, higher speed, higher spec. It really just, whilst they're the two flagships, people aren't necessarily comparing them head to head because you don't normally jump straight into the top of the line. You're likely to have worked your way up, build up a lens collection, and then you're going to, you decide you need speed or you're going to do sports or that kind of thing, so you make that adjustment. But, it's inevitable that the two are going to be compared to each other. So it looks like by the announcement of the Canon today, just, an hour ago, that we're looking at it will be on display, I imagine, at CP Plus in Tokyo, or Yokohama actually, at the end of the month, and I'll be there, so I'll definitely be getting hands-on with it as soon as I possibly can. And we'll see. It was kind of inevitable that they'd both bring out their new cameras this year and that they would hit the market by mid-year so that they're in the marketplace by the Olympics. That tends to be the way they do these things. So let's take a look through the Canon specs, and I'll just highlight a couple of the differences between the two because I honestly think, and all of that I'm saying today is my opinion, I don't have any privileged information here, it's guesses and just opinion, but I think Nikon is going to make some revisions to what they've announced in the next couple of months in light of what's been going on here with Canon. So let's take a look at the 1DX Mark II. So there's a couple of new cool things with this. First of all, it's going up to 14 frames a second in full resolution RAW or JPEG, and up to 16 frames a second if you do it in live view mode. So a bit of a different approach to shooting in live view mode, but then you don't have the shutter, the mirror moving up and down out of the way. So that obviously, removing that mechanical element is, makes it capable of a much faster frames per second. Now, comparing that to the Nikon, we're looking at 12 frames a second compared to the 14. And if you lock all of the features up, then you're getting up to around the 14 mark. So again, the Canon, in terms of straight out of the box frames per second, it's faster than the Nikon. I've been through the Nikon, actually all of its specs in great detail. I was there for the announcement, the press conference, and I've got all videos up. You can check out mattgranger.com/D5 for all of that. Let's focus on the Canon now and what it can do, and big points of difference I'll highlight. Okay, so it'll do up to 170 RAWs in continuous burst mode at that up to 16 frames a second. That's pretty epic. And the 4K movies, you can record them to CFast. It supports the CFast 2.0 format. It's a much faster capability card than compact flash. So whilst Nikon is going with the XQD, Canon is going with the CFast. I don't know, Sony video cameras are using the XQD, but other than that, I can't think of any other stills other than the D4, D4S, and now the D5 offering 2 XQDs and the D500 having 1 and an SD. There's not much else out there. So for me, if I were going to get something, being able to use the compact flashes I already have would be a big thing because, once you get to that point where you may be investing $5,000-$6,000 on a camera, you may own $1,000 worth of memory cards, again, depending on the individual. So this one, we're talking a full frame CMOS sensor. It's 20.2 megapixel. with an ISO range of 100 to 51,200, expandable up to 409,600, which is like the range of the Sony A7S Mark II. Now, Nikon has gone crazy on this and has native up to 100,000 and a whole slate of extra modes, of boost modes, that'll take you up to 3 million ISO, which I just find dumbfounding. And honestly, I haven't tested it, I can't say I'm sure, but I'm pretty certain over 1 million is going to be just garbage. To be honest, I would still on these be, like all cameras, trying to keep it as low as possible. What on my D810 I might be able to go to 1600, something like these cameras might be able to do at 32, 6400, even 12,800. It really depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting JPEG for sports to get on the wire and get out for the internet, then shooting at really high ISO may be just fine. If you're shooting it at slower speed for different applications where it's going to be printed or for higher quality uses, then you're going to want it at lower ISOs. And that's an interesting thing. So, it wasn't that long ago, sports cameras were around 12 megapixel. Let's take Nikon. D3, D3S are 12, D4s were 16, now we're up at 20. They're both up at 20 now, and there's really a lot you can do with them. So the processing power is caught up and kept up, I should say. So now 20 megapixel, they can still do such high frame rates, and the cards have been able to keep up as well. 20 megapixel, to be honest, for me is a nice sweet spot. I do love having 42 megapixel with my A7R Mark II for high-res applications, but I would be really happy with either of these cameras if I was, say, traveling and shooting safari and shooting in dusty conditions where you want the toughest, most weather-sealed bodies, and you want to be able to really do big enlargements or be able to crop into files. At 12 megapixel, I wouldn't really be comfortable. At 20, I'm just okay. So for me, 20 megapixels is a great sweet spot. This has the 1DX Mark II, we're talking a new autofocus system with 61 points. 41 of them are cross-type, and the center point sensitivity down to -3 EVF, and it's got compatibility to f8. That's not a huge jump, we were already at around f5.6 before, but 41 cross-type points is great. To be honest, the flagships always have great tracking. Yes, having a broader spread of points is fantastic, and they do get better generation to generation. It is a technology and a software issue after all. So if you're in the market for a camera like this, no doubt you will notice a noticeable jump. We'll just have to wait till we test it to see exactly how much of a jump that is. It says better tracking with a new tracking and recognition autofocus system with 360,000 pixel metering sensor. Here's a huge point of difference between the 1DX Mark II and the D5, and this is where I think a big revision is going to come. The 1DX Mark II will do 4K video up to 60 frames a second, or 59.94. And you can pull out stills from that at 8.8 megapixel grabs. So really usable. I've seen demos before where magazine covers were taken from 4K video and they look lovely. And it'll do 1080 video up to 120 frames per second. So if you're doing 30 frames per second video, that means you can slow it down 4 times and still get perfectly smooth motion without getting any strange artifacting. So that's double the frame rate that the Nikon is giving you. It will only do 30 frames a second in 4K or 60 in 1080. This is giving you double. So for people who are into video, for a lot of still shooters, you won't care about that. If you're shooting stills and video, that could be a big issue. Okay, we've got a 3.2-inch touch panel LCD with 1.6 million dots. Don't know if it's going to be the same as the Nikon yet, where you can only do menu stuff, or if you're going to be able to swipe through the actual images. I don't know. I was surprised that so many people were excited about the Nikon having that. I personally haven't had that on any of my cameras and haven't really missed it, but it may be one of those things that once you have it, you really appreciate having it. An interesting one, this one now has built-in GPS for geotagging and auto-syncing of the time codes with satellites, and it looks from the pictures like it sits in the top of the pentaprism. It's got a bump there, like I think it's the 7D Mark II has. I'm kind of, if you're shooting out, say I'm traveling in Bhutan, that could be really handy. And a lot of these cameras, they'll say Wi-Fi and GPS, but then it's an extra module that you need to screw on the side for another $500 or whatever. So to have it built in can't be a bad thing as long as it doesn't, ruin the form factor of the camera. Optional wireless transmitter, of course, and it's doing AC, NA, and B file format, so we're right up there. And it's doing 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands. Of course, it's a full mag alloy body and it's dust resistant, and it should be, as good or as better than any of their cameras in terms of weather sealing. After all, these are the flagships and they just absolutely chock-a-block with seals. Okay, so after all of that, it's faster. It does more frames per second in the stills. It does twice the frame rate in video. I don't see full specs here yet, but a big downer for the Nikon D5. Whilst the D500 they announced at the same time will do half-hour recording, but it splits it into 10 3-minute clips, which already is kind of ridiculous. The D5 is announced that only doing 3-minute clips, and there's people on the record saying, well, that's all that photojournalists want, which I always find ridiculous because, yeah, that may be true for some, but you can't just generalize. This isn't 1995 where doing video is an unusual thing now. Meeting with other journalists when I was in CES, a lot of the people who normally would be there writing an article for one of the newspapers are now also required to make a video clip for every single article that they put up. So the ability to do 4K at only 3 minutes is a big downer. Actually, the video I made in CS, just a quick, oh my God, I can't believe they are limiting it like that, was a 4-minute video. So I couldn't have made that on the D5. And with Canon having led the way on video, I'm almost certain that the Canon will have a half-an-hour recording limit. Again, unlimited with an external recorder in the same way the D5 is. But I sincerely expect that Nikon, I thought from the beginning that they'll revise it so that the D5 will do half-hour recording, and I feel sure that they're going to, before it even launches, will update the firmware and re-announce that it's now coming with half-an-hour recording time and that it may have different frame rates. We'll have to wait and see on that. I'm sure the hardware is going to support it. It'll just be interesting to see what are they going to do with this, that the Canon has better video specs overall, and a couple of other specs there obviously outperforming it, and it's coming in at $500 cheaper. I imagine, and this happens often on cameras, that with the movement in the international currency rate, that the price is adjusted slightly before it comes out. So I have a feeling Nikon will drop the price slightly on the Nikon D5, and that we're going to find it's doing full half-hour recording on 4K. And I'm not sure, but I hope they'll bring out different frame rates as well for video. I don't know that it's capable mechanically of doing faster frames per second in stills, so I wouldn't expect to see any movement on that. Would love to hear your thoughts. Have you been waiting for this? And are you happy with the specs? How do you think it stacks up against the D5? And the big question now is, what's the new Canon 5D going to bring to the table? If this already is so accomplished in video, and it's got all of that high-end stuff, Canon just doesn't normally go down the route of having a stripped-down version for a half-size frame in the way that the D3S and the D700 were. It's tended to be that the smaller camera was more geared at video. Then you had, for example, so the 5D video and studio, 1DX for sports, and then the 1DC was the 4K bigger camera. Now the 1DX Mark II seems to completely write off the 1DC and the 5D Mark III. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what's going to happen there. Stay tuned. Once I'm over in Yokohama for CP+, I will get hands-on with this as soon as possible and get video to you. I'll see you soon.